One of the things that I think is very important for us as dissidents to do is to perhaps study and try to glean information on the history of this movement that we are a part of. I know oftentimes me and my friends, we have quoted saying that fuck the movement, it's all about the cause. However, a lot of the things that and trends that we currently see in these circles, there's nothing really new that's under the sun, if you think about it. A lot of the things that we currently see involving snitches and informants and all of these things, we only have to look back to the history of the cause, you could say. Because a lot of the guys in the early days of white nationalism in this country, men like Commander Rockwell, William Luther Pierce, Tom Metzger, Mason, Harold Covington, all of these figures, they had to contend and deal with a lot of these things. And that we can learn answers about how to operate in this age of technology, in the age of the internet, you could say. So tonight, what we're going to do, me and my friend Billy Bob here, we're going to look a bit at a concept called leaderless resistance. This concept, we're also going to read an essay by the man Louis Beam. And we're going to talk a little bit about his life. And he pulled this idea from an intelligence officer by the name of Ulias Amoss, or Amos. I'm not sure how you exactly pronounce it. But he is who Beam credited with his idea and his take on the concept of leaderless resistance. So welcome to the SoNo Show, episode 36, Celulas Fantasmas, which is Latin for ghost cell or phantom cell. And tonight I'm joined by my friend Billy Bob. He has a very wide knowledge on a lot of different subjects. And he's introduced me to several different ideas and things that I find quite interesting that I was not aware of beforehand. So without any further ado, how are you doing tonight, Billy Bob? How's it going up there?
Oh, everything's going all right, buddy. How about yourself? How you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. Life's good. A little sunburnt today, working in the garden, and my stomach is full of steak and raw milk right now, so life's pretty good.
It sounds like it's going pretty good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, Billy Bob, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I wanted to give you an opportunity to feel if you want to introduce yourself and if you want to just tell us anything about yourself. You don't have to go, like I said, you don't have to reveal too much, of course, just whatever you're comfortable with. And I figured I'd give you the floor right now.
Sure. Well, I started doing this thing when I was about 14 years old. Started pretty young.
Oh, yeah.
And at this point, I'm pretty closing in on 25 years getting involved in this thing.
Man, that's a quarter of a century.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that at this point. Time kind of flies. You hear that a lot growing up, but
it doesn't hit you until it seems like when 30 hits really hard. I know it did for me.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. One of those things they say about 30 is that, before 30 you get hurt, after 30 you get injured. I found that to be pretty true. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, I know. You told me that the other day when I was complaining about this damn groin injury I've had for about the last 3 weeks. It's taken a little while to heal, and I've had to tone back leg day a little bit, but it's healing up. I just don't want to rush it back.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. But if anything, if I was to condense that time down and keep it concise, what I would say is that when I got into this, there was a lot of problems. It was constant problems, but very few solutions. And we needed answers. I needed answers personally. And
Yes.
The best way to get answers is questions. So I've spent that time trying to find answers to the problems that we face. And that's what I've been doing this whole time.
Well, man, I've learned so much from you. I mean, you were the one who introduced me to the books of Frank Lee da Silva. You also introduced the concept of the infinite versus the finite games. The book by, I believe it was James Carse, if I remember correctly. So you've got an extensive knowledge about so many different topics. That's something that's it's I ain't trying to talk bad or talk down on some people, but I mean your knowledge exceeds mine in so many different areas, and that's not something you see too terribly often on this side of things. It's a rare quality.
I understand. That's just, it goes down to asking questions. If you really want to know if your heart is in it, a lot of people I've noticed, they have an intellectual pursuit, but if it's not connected to your heart, if it's not connected to an emotion, if it's not connected to wanting to win, it'll fall by the wayside, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think it's like we have to learn to, emotion, love, anger, even hate. These are powerful things, but they can be. It's easy to get I believe it's easy to misapply these things. You could say to wield them perhaps incorrectly. But anything that you do, there has to be, I think, a little bit of emotion in it if it's going to be anything great.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, if you look at things, if you look at it this way, I'm trying to gather my thoughts to word this correctly, that
Oh, take your time. Take your time.
people won't lay down their lives for many things, but they'll lay down their lives for something that they truly believe in and that they love. People won't lay down their lives for necessarily an idea, an intellectual pursuit, but they will lay down their lives. They will fight. They will do that to protect something that they love. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is absolutely correct. Um, but yeah, I figured, hell, we could go ahead and get started. You have turned me on to Lewis Beam here quite a bit lately. I know I have read quite extensively about him the last several days. He is mentioned very often in Mr. Da Silva's books, The Bruder Schweigen, or Schweigen. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. You'll have to forgive me. But man, you wanted to talk a little bit about what led him, before we get into the leaderless resistance, you wanted to speak a little bit about what was his MO, you could say. What formulated his worldview? I know he was born in 1946. He was, I believe, raised in Lake Jackson, Texas, which is a ways south of Houston. But if you wanted to elaborate on that a bit, go ahead.
Yeah, I understand that he was a military veteran. He was a combat
Yes.
veteran. And, he was a true believer in this country. He fought for this country, and he gave his whole heart to it.
Yes.
But that duty that goes with it. Now, I've never been in the military myself. I've never done anything like that personally. But
Yeah, me neither.
I can
I'm a
say,
civilian.
yeah, same. But I can say that, how can I word this? The transition from when he got home, he ended up joining the Klan. Now, the Klan is not much different because the Klan in its heart is militaristic. The Klan is
Yes.
absolutely militaristic. Now, you take oaths and vows like you would with the Constitution of the United States. First and foremost, you swear an oath. You make a vow to protect the Constitution of the United States as a Klansman. You take vows to protect the purity of white womanhood. You take vows for Christian militancy. And, he was also, he was a Christian.
Yes.
He was Christian for one thing. He was a soldier. And this really was just an extension of his service to the country.
Yes. Definitely. I could see that. I can see that. Um, a lot of the combat veterans that came back from Vietnam were extremely angry. I know in one of the essays you had sent me of his, he talks about how disgusted he was, and how I know in one of the later essays too that you had shown me, he talks about meeting in his trip to Russia in order to try to give aid to some during the 2014 conflict. He meets this Russian. He was a former helicopter pilot whenever the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and he was a helicopter pilot in, I believe, from 1987 until 1989. And although Mr. Beam and this Russian gentleman, they didn't speak a word of the same language, but they had a translator there, and they became friends. You could say there's a picture of them sitting there on that train, shaking each other's hands, and he said that at one time they were great enemies, but now after seeing the trajectory of things, they had become friends. You could say, it just goes back to a lot of these Vietnam veterans. They would come back, they'd been butchered, they'd been subjected to horror. And I mean, you kind of see the same thing nowadays the with all the conflict in the Middle East, in Afghanistan and Iraq.
There is a primal kinship with shared suffering, for sure. And it's universal, it's across the board.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, do you want to, let's see, Lewis Beam, he was a reverend in Pastor Butler's Church of Aryan Nations, wasn't he?
From my understanding, yeah, he was. Now, at that time, to become a pastor in Pastor Butler's church, from my understanding, you had to take something called the AIT, or the American Institute of Theology course. And that's something that was a prerequisite for anybody that became a pastor in the Church of Jesus Christ Christian. It's actually something that I took. It was the late Mike Hallamore's church, Kingdom Identity Ministries.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Tom Robb ended up taking it, and several others like Mark Thomas out PA. It was something that was a prerequisite for everybody if you wanted to become a pastor in the Church of Jesus Christ Christian.
How long did it take you to study for the AIT?
3 years. It takes an average of 3 years.
Did you do this by yourself, or was there a course that you had to attend,
Yep.
or
No,
how was it?
it's a correspondence course that they send through the mail, and each week they send you a test, and then you complete it, then send it back, and they grade it. If you fail, they send you have to redo it over again. But for me, it took about a year and a half, but on average, it takes about 3 years.
Wow, that's interesting. How old were you when you took this, if you don't mind me asking?
I was about 22 years old.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. But yeah, if we want to talk a little bit about Lewis Beam, he this is something interesting. I'd sent you that article. I think it was from Timeline, and it talked about the war between the Vietnamese shrimpers
Yeah.
and the the native whites, the native Southerners who were having to deal with these invaders, you could say.
Sure.
You want to elaborate on that some, or I could read this little article here to give people an idea. You want me to read the article?
Well,
Or,
let me a little bit of preface here to that.
okay.
When you come home, he came home from the military. And you got to think of the climate at the time as well. The Vietnam War was not popular at all. It was not popular amongst a lot of the population. You can still see video of people getting spit on and all kinds of stuff at that time.
Yeah. Yes.
And you got if you think of Lewis Beam, I don't know Lewis Beam. I can't speak for him. But
Oh yeah. Me neither. So
if you look at his life and you look at his beliefs and the things that he said, he's been damn near consistent with everything he said. And the two words that come to mind when I think of him is true believer.
yeah.
True believer is the words that come to mind when I think of Lewis Beam. But you believe in America and you go through that war. And many people argue that war was a war that the United States lost. You know, a lot of people argue that that's a war that we haven't won a war since World War II, you know, according to a lot of people, you know. But
Yeah.
what happens when you're to be obedient to your government? What happens when you take oaths as a Klansman to support your government, to fight for your government? Also, you take oaths to defend and protect your God. That you're supposed to be, how can I word this? The Klan was a Christian, it was a militant arm for Christ. That's what the Klan was designed to do. But what happens when your government is corrupt? What happens when your government fails?
Yes.
What you end up doing is that you turn to, in his view, I assume his view because he believed in Yahweh God at that time, a sovereign final authority, which is Yahweh God. That's who you have to turn to.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I mean, to give you an example, if you're a Klansman, you have to memorize the first verse of Romans chapter 12, which goes, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. You know, the heart of the Klansman is service. And not only that, but the motto of the Klan is non silbus et anthar, not for self, but for others.
Yeah.
You know, he had service at the forefront of his mind, but not only that, you come back to a corrupt government.
Yes.
So what do you do as a Christian? This is something that a lot of people, Christians today, fight over, is that do you obey an unlimited obedience to your government? Because you got to understand the next chapter of Romans 12 is Romans 13. And I'll read this little piece here that I took out of this book.
Okay.
According to Romans 13, God has ordained civil government to be a terror to evil works. As civil rulers terrorize the evil, they function as ministers of God to us for good. When the process is reversed and civil rulers themselves become terror to the good, they become ministers of Satan for
Yeah.
evil.
Okay. Interesting.
You know,
Interesting. Um, Man, you've got an extent. That's another thing too. You have an extensive knowledge of the Klan. You know, if isn't there 5 different eras of the Klan? Is that what it is?
some would argue that it's six, that we're in the sixth era. I mean, an era, to understand it correctly, the era is when the Klan completely dies and then it's resurrected. That's the beginning of a new era when it's resurrected.
Okay,
So
interesting.
6 deaths, 5 deaths, and 5 resurrections.
Okay,
4 deaths and 5 resurrections, you could say.
very nice. That's interesting. You know, I don't have a lot of. I really don't have a lot of knowledge at all about the Klan, but you know, you do on the other hand, and it's a history that's worth examining. I believe completely. Um, let's see here. You want me to go ahead and start reading this article real quick
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
about the Vietnamese fishermen? All right, this is an article from 2017, and it is talking about the war between Vietnamese fishermen and the KKK signaled a new type of white supremacy. The Klan brought military support to shrimpers in Texas. It was shrimping season in Texas, and things were getting ugly. In the late 1970s and early 80s, a group of Vietnamese refugees had fled a humanitarian crisis at home and legally resettled in the Galveston Bay area. This is in southern Texas on the coast. In order to start making their way, many of them took up shrimp fishing, much to the dismay of some locals who saw them as competition on the water. Someone will have to get out of this business, explained a white industry bigwig. Of course, this article is written from what you could say our enemy's perspective. But I digress, because you will not be able to make a living. There are only so many shrimp out in that bay, and the more shrimpers you have out there, the less each boat is able to net. Tensions came to a head in 1979 when a fist fight broke out between the white and Vietnamese fishermen, and a white crabber was shot and killed. Hours later, Vietnamese boats were set aflame, and a crab plant that employed a number of Vietnamese workers became a bombing target. The two Vietnamese men accused of the shooting were acquitted on self-defense grounds a few months later. The crabber's father said, "As long as there's one gook left in a fishing town on this Gulf Coast, there's going to be trouble. There's going to be war." He was right about the war part. The incident caught the attention of the Texas Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. They descended on Galveston Bay in 1981 to get rid of the Vietnamese once and for all. A shift was happening in white American extremism, and much of it had to do with veterans. In isolated Texan backwaters, members of the Klan, some of who came out of the military with a feverish hatred of Vietnamese communists, were becoming highly militarized, using the methods they had learned in Vietnam to wage war at home. The Vietnamese in Galveston were refugees brought to the U.S. as a part of a resettlement plan. But to the Klan, they only saw their communist enemies. "I promised them a lot better fight here than they got from the Viet Cong," said Louis Beam, the Grand Dragon of the Texas Knights of KKK, who would go on to become one of the most prominent white supremes in America. Sometime in the late 1970s, Beam had begun training white supremacists to use grenades and assault rifles at secret camps near Houston, teaching commando-style killing to children as young as 8. "We do not mean to train anyone to promote racial warfare," Beam said in 1980, adding, "However, it is realistic to assume it could happen." By that point, Beam had already been implicated in 2 bombings, and in 1979, he had tried to physically assault Chinese Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping at a Texas hotel. In February of 1981, Beam led a Klan rally in the Galveston area, playing now a familiar cocktail of resentments, a diminished sense of manhood, anger of a neglected working class, and an immigrant threat to the job security of real Americans. Of course, they've got that quoted in quotations. You know, I really hate reading from sources of the enemy, you could say. But anyways, he vowed to the crowd of roughly 250 that if the Vietnamese fishermen didn't leave by May 15th, the Klan would take matters into its own hands. Klan guards who had ditched white robes in favor of more militant-looking black caps and shirts stood on the perimeter, carrying semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. 2 days after Beam started offering trainings on the right way to burn a shrimp boat, 2 Vietnamese shrimp boats went up in flames. The arsonists were never caught. One citizen even put an impaled coconut carved to resemble a human head and a Confederate flag on his lawn. In April, a white fisherman pulled his boat up beside 2 Vietnamese fishermen, pointed his pistol at them for a very few tense seconds, and then just left. Then crosses were set ablaze in Vietnamese yards. Some families put their houses up for sale. Others offered to sell their boats, but found no buyers. On March 15th, a shrimp boat manned by armed and hooded Klansmen patrolled the waters of Galveston Bay, circling the Vietnamese boats and parking near the head of the Vietnamese Fishermen Association's family home. A human effigy hung on the rigging, and a small cannon could be seen on the deck. Not long after, Beam and the other Klan members held a fish fry to benefit white fishermen. It had poured that day, dashing any hopes of burning crosses, and the crowd dwindled to about 30. In press interviews at the event, Beam positioned himself as a reasonable, moderating influence who would broker a deal with the Vietnamese and the white fishermen. He wasn't racist, he said, but a friend of white Americans who have legitimate complaints. Of course, he still ejected a local Mexican-American TV reporter. "This is a gathering for white Christians," he said. "We don't have to put up with these arrogant stations sending blacks and Mexicans to interview me." Though the mayor of Cama, the small coastal town where many of the Vietnamese lived, reported finding the scenes of Klan members disturbing, he said, "I don't have any reason to believe the Vietnamese are not safe." The Vietnamese fishermen disagreed. With the help of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Morris D's terrible group, A group of fishermen filed suit against the Knights of the KKK. At a hearing before the trial, Beam, who wore his Klan robes to court and announced, "I'm charged with loving this country." He was accompanied by a self proclaimed Nazi who menacingly took photographs of the Vietnamese and their council. During the trial, Beam was rumored to be hiding an ivory handled revolver under his robes. Morris Dees, the founder of the SPLC, who was arguing the case for the Vietnamese fishermen, demanded he revealed the gun. Beam responded, "No one, not even my attorney, will search me." At one point during the trial, he called Dees an Antichrist Jew and hoisted a Bible and cross into the air to exorcise him. Beam would later challenge Dees to a duel to the death, "You against me." During the trial, a video was uncovered that showed Beam clad in military fatigues instructing trainees, "Utterly destroy everybody," Beam barked at his mini militia. "Maximum damage, maximum violence in the shortest period of time. They can only do one thing, die." The judge issued a court order ending the harassment. A second order disbanded Beam's paramilitary group, and 5 training camps were shut down. The fishermen had won the suit, but many of them had lost their sense of security and their livelihood. 4 years later, Louis Malle, of all people, would direct a movie about the clash, and Ed Harris playing the sympathetic protagonist, a Vietnam vet forlorn over the immigrant threat to his way of life. And let's see. That's enough reading right there. That's about the gist of it. Anyways, you want to go ahead, Billy Bob? Any thoughts on that?
Training children as young as 8 years old. That's been,
Yeah.
you know,
I think there's some embellishment there. I
sure,
would think.
there always is. Now, the part of challenging him to a duel, that was real. That's real.
Yes.
That did happen. Now, in that article I read also that it was suspected that he had a gun on him, and not one person searched him, and he's in a courtroom. Now, why
Yeah.
would you think that is? No
Mm.
bailiff is searching him, nothing.
Yeah.
You understand that Louis Beam was a Grand Dragon at that time. Now, Grand Dragon, now realm is a state. That's another word for a state.
Yeah.
Now, that's what a realm is. He was head leader of his own realm, which is what a Grand Dragon is. Now, that means that he's got people in every county. That means he's got people in every city. Now, think of the power that he commanded in the state of Texas. Now, I'm not saying that he filled up completely the state of Texas, but if you can pull men to pull off what he did or what is alleged that he did, the man had some power. Now, if you're walking in
Yes.
a courtroom with a Klan robe on or a ceremonial robe and you got a cross and they're threatening you, saying that you got a gun on you and nobody's searching you, I mean, I think that's a testament to the power that he had at that moment.
Oh yeah. You've mentioned before that the Klan used to have a ton of power in this country, especially the southern states.
Yeah.
Didn't you say that like before any local election, basically the candidate had to be approved by the Klan? Is that true?
You had to. Absolutely. You had to be approved by the Klan. I mean, people who held, let's put it this way. We hear the word white supremacy now. I want to give you Billy Bob Light because I know where we're at, you know.
Yeah.
So I'll try to be somewhat PC about it, but we hear the term white supremacy, and a lot of people shirk at that. A lot of people cringe when they hear white supremacists because our enemies use that word.
Yeah.
But you got to understand what that meant at that time. If you look in the Klan doctrine, or what's called the Klansman's Manual, or the Kloran with a K,
Yeah.
it says to forever maintain white supremacy. Now, what does that mean? If you look at power, that was a question. I asked you the question. I was answering myself there. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. I
No,
think it just means sovereignty, sovereignty over ourselves.
sure. But I mean, if you define the word power itself, it could be summed up in the civic arena as having others do what you would have them do. Now, you can do that through wealth. You can do that through force. You can do that through social norms. You can do that through numbers. And you can do that through ideas. To have power in each one of those realms is a supremacy in the civic arena. So that's why they wanted white supremacy. It's having power across the spectrum. If that makes
Yes. Oh yeah, that was very eloquently put right there. I like that. But yeah, man, that's the history of it is really interesting, and you have to do a lot of you just have to look at the right places, because a lot of this history, and I mean even across the broader movement, you could say, is you'll find a lot of trash. You'll find a lot of it's like the enemies are recording the history that's presented to the mainstream, yet there's so much more to the story. So I guess now, oh, did you have something you wanted to
No, no,
add to that?
no. Go ahead.
All right, I was going to say, would you like to get into reading about leaderless resistance
Yeah,
now?
do go ahead.
All right, this will take me a few minutes to get through. It's a few pages here. Leaderless Resistance. This was published by Beam on issue 12, which would have been released in February of 1992. It was the final edition. And let me get a drink of water here, and I'll get started. The concept of leaderless resistance was proposed by Colonel Ulias Amoss. I'm not sure. Who was the founder of the International Service of Information Incorporated, located in Baltimore, Maryland. Colonel Amos Amoss, it's spelled Amoss. You'll have to forgive me. Died more than 15 years ago, but during his life was a tireless opponent of communism, as well as a skilled intelligence officer. Colonel Amos first wrote of leaderless resistance on April the 17th, 1962. His theories of organization were primarily directed against the threat of eventual communist takeover in the United States. The present writer with the theories and the present writer with the benefits of having lived many years beyond Colonel Amos has taken his theories and expounded upon them. Colonel Amos feared the communists. This author fears the federal government. Communism now represents a threat to no one in the United States, while federal tyranny represents a threat to everyone. The writer has joyfully lived long enough to see the dying breaths of communism, but may, unhappily, remain long enough to see the last gasps of freedom in America. In the hope that somehow America can still produce the brave sons and daughters necessary to fight off ever increasing persecution and oppression, this essay is offered. Frankly, it is too close to call at this point. Those who love liberty and believe in freedom enough to fight for it are rare today. But within the bosom of every once great nation, there remains secreted the pearls of former greatness. They are there. I have looked into their sparkling eyes, sharing a brief moment in time with them as I passed through this life, relished their friendship, endured their pain, and they mine. We are a band of brothers, native to the soil, gaining strength from one another as we have rushed headlong into a battle that all the weaker, timid men say we cannot win. Perhaps, but then again, perhaps we can. It's not over till the last freedom fighter is buried or imprisoned, or the same happens to those who would destroy their freedom. Barring any cataclysmic events, the struggle will go on for years. The passage of time will make it clear to even the more slow among us that the government is the foremost threat to the life and liberty of the folk. The government will no doubt make today's oppressiveness look like grade school work compared to what they have planned in the future. Boy, I think that's the truth, to be honest. Some of the stuff that we've seen happen. I mean, you've got to keep in mind this essay was written and released over 31 years ago. Meanwhile, there are those who continue to hope that somehow the few can do what the many have not. We are cognizant of that before things get better, they will certainly get worse, as a government shows a willingness to use ever more severe police state measures among dissidents. This changing situation makes it clear to those who oppose state repression must be prepared to alter, adapt, and modify their behavior, strategy, and tactics as circumstances warrant. Failure to consider new methods and implement them as necessary will make the government efforts at a suppression uncomplicated. It is the duty of every patriot to make the tyrant's life miserable. When one fails to do so, he not only fails himself, but his people. Let me scroll down a bit here. With this in mind, current methods of resistance to tyranny employed by those who love our race, culture, and heritage must pass a litmus test of soundness. Methods must be objectively measured as to their effectiveness, as well as to whether they make the government's intention on repression more possible or more difficult. Those not working to aid our objectives must be discarded, or the government benefits from our failure to do so. And I was going to say, Billy, if there's any time in here that you want to chime in with some thought that you may have, feel free.
Sure.
Did you have anything you wanted to add right this second?
No, go ahead. You're good.
Okay. Well, let me bring up my thing. Okay. Let's see. Let me scroll down.
Now, what do you think about what you read so far? About the foresight of what we see today?
Well, what I think it is here, he says we basically have to evolve and adapt, you could say. We have to modify. And, honestly, I think this is sort of a criticism of, the idea of what you could call public facing groups. That's that has been a pretty big debate in the past in these circles. We all know, I'm sure you have heard it, Metzger, what he had to say about what happened in Charlottesville almost 6 years ago. He said it was a clusterfuck.
Yeah.
And while I do think that public groups can be necessary, they are a necessary sort of function. It's like you had said before, to me, Billy. There is the above ground, and then there's the underground.
Right.
You want to add anything to that? Any other?
When it comes to Beam, I think that particular moment when he had the incident with the shrimping boats or the Vietnamese boats, I think that was a turning point. It would be interesting to know what year Leaderless Resistance was written.
Yes.
I believe it was 92, if I remember correctly.
Yes, sir. That's it.
Okay. Do you know what year the whole thing happened with the shrimping boats?
It was in 1979 through 81, basically.
Okay, so it was early on. But, you also got to take in consideration what was going on in 92. Metzger just had a trial.
True.
There before. I mean, there was a lot going on at that time.
Man, the 80s was a wild, wild decade. Even the 90s, too, Basically all of it, And that's something that struck me when I got to reading Mr. Da Silva's books about the order, was on the mainstream Americans, probably liberals and conservatives. The 80s was viewed as this time of Reaganomics and unlimited economic growth, but there was a very strong and sometimes hidden, a very strong undercurrent of revolution that was brewing. It's fascinating. And then, you think in the early 90s, what we had was, Ruby Ridge and, Waco. So it was a wild time.
Which he was there, by the way. I don't know if you knew that or were going to mention that or not.
Oh, I didn't know that. So Beam was at Ruby Ridge?
No, he was at Waco.
Shit. Okay.
He actually printed up his own press pass and ended up going in there and talking to the main FBI guy that was running the raid at Waco. And he asked a question. I'm going to paraphrase this. It's on film. I think you can find it on Netflix somewhere, a particular documentary about Waco. But he questioned him. He said, "Do you think the United States is turning into a police state?"
Yeah.
And he said that on camera, and they ended up kicking him out once he figured out who he was. But when we talked earlier, I said that he always positioned himself at the throat of the enemy or at the cusp of impending conflict. And I think that was really one of those examples. He was right there at Waco, man. Right there.
Man, that's awesome. I didn't know. I never knew that he was there. That's interesting.
Yeah, right there sitting with CNN and all of them.
Oh man, He was a driven man, that was for sure. Well, let's see. Let me get back to it here. Um, with this in mind, current methods of resistance to tyranny employed by those who love our race, culture, and heritage must pass a litmus test of soundness. Actually, I think I just read this, and this is also he mentions a point here that's important. Any organization should work very hard to discard those who are not working to aid our objectives. And I mean, this can include, active informants, dead weight, you could call it, or those that are just actively going to throw a monkey wrench in your plans. And he mentioned the last bit of the sentence of the last line. He said the government benefits from our failure to do so. As honest men who have banded together into groups or associations of a political or religious nature are falsely labeled domestic terrorists or cultists and suppressed, it will become necessary to consider other methods of organization, or as the case may very well call for, a non-organization. One should keep in mind that it is not in the government's interest to eliminate all groups. Some few must remain in order to perpetuate the smoke and mirrors vision for the masses that America is a free democratic country where dissent is allowed. Most organizations, however, that possess the potential for effective resistance will not be allowed to continue. And you know what group automatically popped into my mind when I thought about this, Billy Bob?
What's that?
The Bruder Schweigen, the
Yep.
order. That's when I was reading this the other day. But anyways, which of course that's not, that wasn't like an above ground organization, you could say.
No,
But anyways,
it attempted to be at first, from my understanding.
yes, they did. Anyone who is so naive as to believe the most powerful government on earth will not crush any who pose a real threat to that power should not be active, but rather at home studying political history. And I mentioned the order a second ago. Something I've liked to study before is the years of lead in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a party, it was a major political party in Italy after World War II. It was called MSI, or it was the Italian Social Movement. It was a fascist political party, but basically they were toothless, you could say. They were extremely ineffective. That was another thing. It seems like, these tactics that the government or the ruling authority uses I mean, we see this today, you could call it American Gladio, like Operation Gladio, which was prominent in Italy and Belgium back following World War II on up through the 1990s.
Sure.
That sort of thing, that's a technique I believe as old as time. Didn't Lenin mention something about whenever, the Bolsheviks had taken over Russia? He said that, we will control the opposition ourselves. I think that's a tactic that has been used for a long, long time.
Oh yeah, controlled opposition is a real thing, and it's been used since time immemorial. Absolutely,
definitely. All right, let me. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
When you think about what he's suggesting here, really at that time there was only a couple people that was pushing that within this thing, and that was Metzger and that was Beam. That was really the two people that was pushing that at the moment. But, there are successful examples of that, of leaderless resistance. It is a safe way, especially if you are a single-celled individual. The playbook of the government is pretty simple. Infiltrate, gather evidence, gather enough evidence to gain a conviction. That's the whole entire playbook, But
yes,
if
that
you
is
don't
true.
tell anybody, I live by pretty simple principles. You can't hit what you can't see.
That's very true.
And the strike you don't see coming, is the one that always takes you out.
That's true.
You look at any fight, you watch UFC, MMA, any type of boxing, Anytime you see a knockout, it's always the fighter that gets knocked out. You never see they never see the punch. Never.
That's how it goes.
You know?
That's how it goes.
But I think that what you've read thus far, it's held up the test of time.
Oh yeah, I believe so too. I mean, considering all these things. Let me see. Where was I? Okay. The question as to who is to be left alone and who is not will be answered by how groups and individuals deal with several factors, such as avoidance of conspiracy plots, rejection of feeble-minded malcontents, insistence upon quality of the participants, avoidance of all contact with the front men for the Federals, the news media, and finally, camouflage, which can be defined as the ability to blend in the public's eye, the more committed groups of resistance with mainstream kosher associations that are generally seen as harmless. Primarily, though, whether any organization is allowed to continue in the future will be a matter of how big a threat a group presents. Not a threat in terms of armed might or political ability, for there is none of either for the present, but rather threat in terms of potentiality. And this is a part I love right here. It is potential the feds fear the most. Whether that potential exists in an individual or group is incidental. The feds measure potential threat in terms of what might happen given a situation conducive to action on the part of a restive organization or individual. Accurate intelligence gathering allows them to assess the potential. Showing one's hand before the bets are made is a sure way to lose.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. The movement for freedom is rapidly approaching the point where, for many people, the options of belonging to a group will be non existent. For others, group membership will be a viable option for only the immediate future. Eventually, and perhaps much sooner than most believe possible, the price paid for membership will exceed any perceived benefit. But for now, some of the groups that do exist often serve a useful purpose, either for the newcomer who can be indoctrinated into the ideology of the struggle, or for generating positive propaganda to reach potential freedom fighters. It is sure that, for the most part, this struggle is rapidly becoming a matter of individual action, each of its participants making a private decision in the quietness of his heart to resist by any means necessary. It is hard to know what others will do, for no man truly knows another man's heart. It is enough to know what one himself will do. A great teacher once said, "Know thyself." Few men really do, but let each of us promise ourselves not to go quietly to the fate our would-be masters have planned. The concept of leaderless resistance is nothing less than a fundamental departure in theories of organization. The orthodox scheme of organization is diagrammatically represented by the pyramid, with the mass at the bottom and the leader at the top. This fundamental of organization is to be seen not only in armies, which are, of course, the best illustration of the pyramid structure, with a mass of soldiery, the privates, at the bottom responsible to the corporals, who are in turn responsible to the sergeants, and so on up the entire chain of command to the generals at the top. But the same structure is seen in corporations, ladies' garden clubs, and in our political system itself. This orthodox pyramid scheme of organization is to be seen basically in all existing political, social, and religious structures in the world today, from the federal government to the Roman Catholic Church. The Constitution of the United States, in the wisdom of the founders, tried to sublimate the essential dictatorial nature of pyramidal organization by dividing authority into three different branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. But the pyramid remains essentially untouched. The scheme of organization, the pyramid, however, is not only useless but extremely dangerous for the participants when it is utilized in a resistance movement against state tyranny. Especially is this so in technologically advanced societies, where electronic surveillance can often penetrate the structure, revealing its chain of command. Experience has revealed over and over again that anti state political organizations utilizing this method of command and control are easy prey for government infiltration, entrapment, and destruction of the personnel involved. This has been seen repeatedly in the United States, where pro government infiltrators or agent provocateurs weasel their way into patriotic groups and destroy them from within. I think that's a very important part of the essay right there. You got anything you'd like to add, Billy Bob?
Well, I was going to ask you, what do you think of that so far?
I think it's absolutely correct. I mean, you got to look at it this way. We are the underdog right now. We are the resistance. And if you are the resistance, you do not have, you do not have the luxury of using a sort of pyramid structure, you could say.
Sure.
Is anything you'd like to add to it?
I'm in complete agreement with that for sure. When that was written, society was a little bit different at the time. What he's talking about is revolutionary activity. He's talking revolutionary activity there. And, since the advent of the internet, many of us now, I don't want to be a downer, but I'm just going to call it like it is, that we confuse revolution and recreation. We confuse recreation with revolution now. People are so demoralized just for the fact of getting outside and let the sun hit your face is a revolutionary act. Or doing some push-ups or some squats or something like that is supposed to be a revolutionary act. That's how demoralized we've gotten since that time, since that piece has been written.
Yes. And technology's advanced so much further since then,
Sure. I mean, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, that's really a wild card in all of this. And I mean, you think about, I hear a lot of people in these circles are talking about, the ability of AI to do this or that. It's, I don't think it's a positive,
Yeah, I'm absolutely in agreement with that. I mean, I've made a post in your group not too long ago about the types of societies that there are. You have a might of right society where there's bloodshed and warfare, and then you have an honor society afterward. Your honor society, to prevent the bloodshed and killing the best of your people, your word is what becomes a currency in that particular society. Treaties are signed so that way bloodshed can be spared. But then after that, what you got is you got a humanistic type society where just being a human being and being alive gives you currency.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we're in today.
Well,
appears.
I think there's one more after that, and this is the one I think we're in, is that because people are humanistic, what ends up happening is, to gain even more social currency, what people do is that they help people that are weaker, and they sacrifice and give to people that are weaker. So what ends up happening is that the masses play victim. It's a victimhood society.
Yes.
And it makes the weakest of people, where there's nothing, the infrastructure breaks down because people are so weak mentally, physically, spiritually, that they are dependent on stronger people to take care of them. Personally, this is going to sound a little bit tinfoil, but I think that we're heading towards a direction that machines are going to take the place of supporting people or keeping this victimhood-based society alive.
I could see that possibly be in the future, certainly. And I think that what you described, that last society, that is it. That's what we live in today. Absolutely.
Well, the good news for that, and this goes back to recreation being a revolutionary activity, by building yourself up, by making yourself strong. These things are cyclical.
Yes.
The might is right. The people that are strongest, even in that victimhood society, if you make yourself strong, if you make yourself a dangerous human being, when the time comes, might is right and bloodshed is going to come once again, and you'll be at the top of the heap instead of the bottom.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the most sound advice that you can give, I believe, especially to any young men, and I mean even young women out there. Just to be the best version of yourself as possible.
Absolutely. But, I think we are absolutely going to a might is right society soon. I mean, some of us, I hate to say this, like the Klan was an honor based system, it was an honor based society, and it was also a pyramid structure as well. This is why you see its decline today. We really don't live in an honor based society more unless we're in tribal circles. You know what I mean?
That's true. That is very true.
And it will come once again. I mean, in your own tribal circle, you can live in an honor based system, but prepare for war.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh man. Well, let's see here. I'll continue reading. In the pyramid type of organization, an infiltrator can destroy anything which is beneath his level of infiltration, and those often above him as well. If the traitor has infiltrated at the top, then the entire organization from top down is compromised and may be traduced at will. An alternative to the pyramid type of organization is the cell system. In the past, many political groups, both right and left, have used the cell system to further their objectives. Two examples will suffice. During the American Revolution, committees of correspondence were formed throughout the 13 colonies. Their purpose was to subvert the government and thereby aid the cause of independence. The Sons of Liberty, who made a name for themselves dumping government tax tea into the harbor at Boston, were the action arm of the committees of correspondence. Each committee was a secret cell that operated totally independent of the other cells. Information on the government was passed from committee to committee, from colony to colony, and then acted upon a local basis. Yet, even in these bygone days of poor communication, of weeks to months for a letter to be delivered, the committees, without any central direction whatsoever, were remarkably similar in tactics employed to resist government tyranny. It was, as the first American patriots knew, totally necessary for anyone to give an order for anything. Information was made available to each committee, and each committee acted as it saw fit. A recent example of the cell system taken from the left wing of politics are the communists. The communists, in order to get around the obvious problems involved in a pyramidal organization, developed to an art the cell system. They had numerous independent cells which operated completely isolated from one another and particularly with no knowledge of each other, but were orchestrated together by a central headquarters. For instance, during World War II in Washington, it is known that there were at least 6 secret communist cells operating at high levels in the United States government, plus all the open communists who were protected and promoted by President Roosevelt. However, only one of the cells was rooted out and destroyed. How many more actually were operating, no one can say for sure. The communist cells, which operated in the U.S. until late 1991 under Soviet control, could have at their command a leader who held a social position, which appeared to be very lowly. He could be, for example, a busboy in a restaurant, but in reality, a colonel or a general in the Soviet Secret Service, the KGB. Under him could be a number of cells, and a person active in one cell would almost never have knowledge of individuals who are active in another cell. The value of this is that while any one cell can be infiltrated, exposed, or destroyed, such action will have no effect on the other cells. In fact, the members of the other cells will be supporting that cell which is under attack and ordinarily would lend very strong support to it in many ways. This is at least part of the reason, no doubt, that whenever in the past communists were attacked in this country, support for them sprang up in many unexpected places. I thought that was pretty fascinating right there. Because, I mean, you look at it back during the age of McCarthyism, um, someone would get outed as, being a commie and, oh, they would have, support from some media group or maybe a newspaper or someone else be like, oh no, they're definitely not a communist.
That started in Wheeling, West Virginia. He gave that speech in Wheeling, West Virginia. McCarthy did.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Wheeling, West Virginia is a pretty interesting town. It's got a bit of an interesting history. There's a few other things that had happened there that's, you could say small events, but they were, you could say, the precursor to something that's much larger.
That, for sure.
Let's see, where was I? Let's see. Let me scroll down a tad bit here. The efficient and effective operation of a cell system after the communist model is, of course, dependent upon central direction, which means impressive organization, funding from the top, and outside support, all of which the communists had. Obviously, American patriots have none of these things at the top or anywhere else. And so, an effective cell organization based upon the Soviet system of operation is impossible. Two things become clear from the above discussion. First, that the pyramid type of organization can be penetrated quite easily, and it thus is not a sound method of organization in most situations, where the government has the resources and the desire to penetrate the structure, which is the situation in this country. Secondly, that the normal qualifications for the cell method is left for those resisting state tyranny. The answer comes from Colonel Amoss, who proposed the phantom cell mode of organization, which he described as leaderless resistance, a system of organization that is based upon the cell organization but does not have any central control or direction. That is, in fact, almost identical to the methods used by the committees of correspondence during the American Revolution. Utilizing the leaderless resistance concept, all individuals and groups operate independently of each other and never report to a single headquarters or single leader for direction or instruction, as those who belong to a typical pyramid organization would do. Anything else you'd like to add real quick, Billy Bob? Any thoughts you have?
There's a couple examples that he was talking about in there with pyramid organizations. Like where I'm from, you have 1% motorcycle clubs like the Pagans Motorcycle Club. They'll send in
Yes.
somebody. One guy ended up getting in the Mother Club, which is like you're talking about a centralized organization that controls the rest of the clubs. He ended up becoming the sergeant at arms at that time, which was number 3 man, and took down 55 people in this state alone.
Wow.
Yep. 55 people in this state alone.
Got them indicted and everything.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
55 convictions.
55. Holy shit.
Yeah.
See, that just goes to show to you there, that snitches are so damaging if they are placed in the right positions.
Absolutely. For sure. But, speaking about leaderless resistance and talking about the past, leaderless resistance has traditionally been hated in what the movement is.
Yeah.
Movement, it's really been hated. For the reason is because a lot of people look at it as a cop out. People say, well, what are you doing? What's your activism? And some guys would say, well, I do leaderless resistance. And then people would reply,
oh, you're doing nothing.
Yeah, well, what have you done? Well, I can't because, I'd be telling on myself.
Yeah. Secrecy is unfortunately looked down upon in these circles. And I think we're just going to have to be as extremely secretive as our enemies,
There definitely needs to be an understanding of the above ground and underground, hearts, minds, and words and deed. If you think about it, the above ground is words and support, and the underground is the deeds.
Yes.
Deeds of vigilance, as I like to say.
Ooh, I like that term. That's a good term right there. Let's see. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No. That's what I had to add at the moment. That's what came to.
Oh, nice. I see. All right. Let's see. At first glance, such a type of organization seems unrealistic, primarily because there appears to be no organization. The natural question thus arises as to how are the phantom cells and individuals to cooperate with each other when there is no intercommunication or central direction. The answer to this question is that participants in a program of leaderless resistance through phantom cell or individual action must know exactly what they are doing and how to do it. It becomes the responsibility of the individual to acquire the necessary skills and information as to what is to be done. This is by no means as impractical as it appears, because it is certainly true that in any movement, all persons involved have the same general outlook, are acquainted with the same philosophy, and generally react to given situations in similar ways. The previous history of the committees of correspondence during the American Revolution show this to be true. Since the entire purpose of leaderless resistance is to defeat state tyranny, at least insofar as this essay is concerned, all members of phantom cells or individuals will tend to react to objective events in the same way through usual tactics of resistance. Organs of information distribution, such as newspapers, leaflets, computers, etc., which are widely available to all, keep each person informed of events, allowing for a planned response that will take many variations. No one need issue an order to anyone. Those idealists truly committed to the cause of freedom will act when they feel the time is ripe or will take their cue from others who precede them. While it is true that much could be said against this type of structure as a method of resistance, it must be kept in mind that leaderless resistance is a child of necessity. The alternatives to it have been shown to be unworkable or impractical. Leaderless resistance has worked before in the American Revolution, and if the truly committed put it to use for themselves, it will work now. It goes almost without saying that leaderless resistance leads a very small or even one-man cells of resistance, those who join organizations to play let's pretend or who are groupies will quickly be weeded out. While for those who are serious about their opposition to federal despotism, this is exactly what is desired. From the point of view of tyrants and would-be potentates in the federal bureaucracy and police agencies, nothing is more desirable than that those who oppose them be unified in their command structure and that every person who opposes them belong to a pyramid type group. Such groups and organizations are an easy kill, especially in light of the fact that the Justice Department promised in 1987 that there would never be another group that opposed them that they did not have at least one informer in. These federal friends of the government are intelligence agents. They gather information that can be used at the whim of a federal DA to prosecute. The line of battle has been drawn. Patriots are required, therefore, to make a conscious decision to either aid the government in its illegal spying by continuing with old methods of organization or to make the enemy's job more difficult by implementing effective countermeasures. Got anything you'd like to add so far, Billy?
Really, the importance of what you're saying is, we talked a little bit ago about the types of societies that we're in. If you look at any social movement that's succeeded, they're all non-white. Let's be honest about it.
That is true.
But every single one of them got to positions of power or perceived power through the path of victimhood. They've got there through the path of victimhood, through the civil rights era, through the gay rights and the Stonewall riots and all that shit. They all claimed victimhood. We have been denied the ability to claim victimhood to gain power. You will never, ever be able to claim that you're a victim. Ever.
Oh.
Many of our people constantly are putting videos up of white people getting the shit kicked out of them, and spit on, and cut up, and ran over, and You know, it's almost cartoonish in a sense of how much stuff's being put out there. It's demoralizing in a way. I've not a big fan of that, because we are never, ever, ever going to gain power through the victimhood path.
We're
Ever.
not. We're not. We need to put that out of our mind. It just makes us look weak too, as well.
But
That's
you know,
just my opinion.
I agree. But you know, at the same time, there are parts of that that both it applies. It goes both ways as a double-edged sword. For instance, the way they do that is that first. Well, let me rephrase it this way: the revolutionary machine is fueled by the blood of martyrs.
That's true.
It always has been. And, you know, traction, that machine gains traction over the bodies. And it's the same thing for us as well at certain points. But, you know, there is going to be some bloodshed here in the future. I absolutely believe that with all my heart. But it's going to have to be in a different way. And we can't claim victimhood status. Instead of being a victim and putting that in your heart, put zeal in your heart in its place.
Damn right. That's inspirational right there. Hey, Billy Bob, can you entertain the audience just for a second? I've got to step away for just a minute. I'll be right back.
All right, let me see what I'm doing here.
All right, I'll be right back.
Yep. I'm on an iPhone, so I'll do my best to see what's going on. Okay. Cow Guy, it's an awesome name. Fighting honorably is not something you can do if your enemy doesn't do the same. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I agree 100%. No room for self-pity. Absolutely. There is no room for self-pity. I mean, it doesn't gain you anything having self-pity now. I'm not sitting here trying to point fingers and say, oh, these people are doing wrong. I'm just as guilty as anybody else. You know, this applies to me. It applies to me and it applies to everybody in our race. These are things that we have to take heart. You know, we're talking about people from the past. And if you listen to their speeches and if you listen to their belief systems, that's one thing they talk about constantly is heart. You know, you listen, Bob Matthews has 2 recordings out there that people can listen to. And in both of them, he references the heart over and over and over again.
10,000 beats, one heart.
Yep. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you doing that real quick, Billy. The old tart cherry, my bladder's the size of a pea, and the tart cherry juice and the raw milk, you know, it was, didn't want to sit here and, you know, piss on myself, you know.
They're going to start selling your blood as a performance enhancing drug if you keep doing that.
Yeah, it'd be nice. You know, I could go to, you know, the plasma giveaway place, you know, and whoever the lucky recipient of my plasma will be given, you know, they will automatically receive a decade added to their lifespan. Yeah. Or maximum fertility or something like that.
Yeah, SoNo Inc. right there. Absolutely, you trademark that shit.
Yeah. Oh, man.
You know, one thing I'd like to say is that Mason had said, and I'm referring to James Mason, he said, give hate a chance. And I don't like to use the word hate. It's a buzzword that the enemy uses against us. I like to use the word zeal. Zeal is a word that is, in my opinion, a much stronger word, and there's a lot of honor behind it as well. You know,
oh, yes. I love that word. Yes. That's nice.
You know, people might say that you're a frantic or a fanatic or, you know, you're filled with hate. No, I'm filled with zeal.
That's it.
Yeah,
that's it right there.
People can use.
I like the term too, like a sort of divine inspiration, I should say. You know, me and you were talking just the other morning, you know, and I was telling you how, like, I feel like I'm at a sort of creative impasse, or, you know, if I was a writer or an author, you know, you could say that I was having writer's block.
Sure.
But, you know, I got to talking to you, and then boom, within like 5 minutes, I was like, okay, I know something to talk about, you know.
Yep.
that is a sort of divine inspiration, I guess you could say.
That-
Um,
Well, it's like being in tune.
yes,
You know, if you're in a band and one person's out of tune, the band's going to sound like shit. If you have 20 instruments, one's out of tune, it's going to sound like shit. But you know, if you get the right person along and they're in tune with you, you can harmonize and you can play some music together. You know what I mean?
yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let me see where I was here as regarding this document. Um, let me see. By implementing counter effective. Um, all right, let me continue here. Now, there will no doubt be mentally handicapped people out there who, while standing at a podium with an American flag draped in the background and a lone eagle soaring in the sky above, will state emphatically in their best sounding red, white, and blue voice, "So what if the government is spying? We are not violating any laws." Such crippled thinking by any serious person is the best example that there is a need for special education classes. The person making such a statement is totally out of contact with political reality in this country and unfit for leadership of anything more than a dog sleigh in the Alaskan wilderness. The old born, the old born on the 4th of July mentality that has influenced so much of the American patriots' thinking in the past will not save him from the government in the future. Re education for non thinkers of this type will take place in the federal prison system where there are no flags or eagles, but an abundance of men who were not violating any law. You know, that's something I've heard some people say before. Some people that I was friends with in the past, we would talk a bit about, how technology and all these things are spying on us. And I'm like, man, I don't fucking like that shit. And, back then, we was all up to a little bit of, criminal activity, you could say. But
Yeah.
one of my friends was like, well, man, we're not really doing anything that wrong. Why should we worry about it? And I'm like, man, that's the worst fucking attitude to have. It's not going to stop there. And who's to say in the future we may end up doing something that, you know, that'll literally make the roof cave in on top of our heads. I don't understand that. They're like, oh, so what if we're being watched and monitored? We're not doing anything wrong.
That's
I don't really understand that.
It's like taking your woman out and stripping her naked and say, well, she ain't trying to have sex with anybody.
Yeah.
She'll walk downtown, you know?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, let me see here. We're about done with this document. Most groups who unify their disparate associates into a single structure have short political lives. Therefore, those movement leaders constantly calling for unity of organization rather than the desirable unity of purpose. That is a very important comment right there. Usually fall into one of three categories. They may not be sound political tacticians, but rather just committed men who feel unity would help their cause while not realizing that the government would greatly benefit from such efforts. The federal objective to imprison or destroy all who oppose them is made easier in pyramid organizations. Or perhaps they do not fully understand the struggle they are involved in and that the government they oppose has declared a state of war against those fighting for faith, folk, freedom, and constitutional liberty. Those in power will use any means to rid themselves of opposition. The third class, calling for unity, and let us hope this is the minority of the three, are men more desirous of the supposed power that a large organization would bestow than of actually achieving their stated purpose. Sometimes I think that kind of describes some of the things that we perhaps see today.
Yep.
Conversely, oh, was you going to mention something?
No,
You have
I'm
anything to?
agreeing with you. I was in agreement.
Oh, okay. Conversely, the last thing federal snoops would have, if they had any choice in the matter, is a thousand different small phantom cells opposing them. Now, this is really important here. It is easy to see why such a situation is an intelligence nightmare for a government intent upon knowing everything they possibly can about those who oppose them. The Federals, able to amass overwhelming strength of numbers, manpower, resources, intelligence gathering, and capability at any given time, need only a focal point to direct their anger. Let's see. Someone mentioned something. Son of a bitch, where was I?
He had look for nightmare.
An intelligence nightmare for a government intent upon knowing everything they possibly can about those who oppose them. The Feds, able to amass an overwhelming strength of numbers, manpower, resources, intelligence gathering, and capability at any given time, need only a focal point to direct their anger. A single penetration of a pyramid-type organization can lead to the destruction of the whole, whereas Leaderless Resistance predicts no single opportunity for the Federals to destroy a significant portion of the resistance. With the announcement by the Department of Justice that 300 FBI agents formerly assigned to watching Soviet spies in the U.S., domestic counterintelligence, are now to be used to combat crime, the federal government is preparing the way for a major assault upon those persons opposed to their policies. Many anti-government groups dedicated to the preservation of America, of our forefathers, can expect shortly to feel the brunt of a new federal assault on liberty. It is clear, therefore, that it is time to rethink traditional strategy and tactics when it comes to opposing a modern police state. America is quickly moving into a long, dark night of police state tyranny, where the rights now accepted by most as being inalienable will disappear. Let the coming night be filled with 1,000 points of resistance. Like the fog which forms when conditions are right and disappears when they are not, so must the resistance to tyranny be. Let's see, here's a quote to close out the essay with. If every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect these rights constantly. This is from a book called The Law, which was written by a guy named Frederick Bastiat Paris in 1850. Editor's note real quick. This essay was written by Louis Beam back in 1983. It was published at that time. Republished above, though, in 1992. And he said, I do not take credit for the theories expounded upon here. Colonel Amoss deserves the credit for his brilliant analysis and insightful thinking. And that is the essay of Leaderless Resistance by Louis Beam. You got any thoughts there?
It's a hell of a lot longer than what I remember it to be.
It is. It's a lot longer when you actually get to, you actually have to read it out.
It's potent. I mean, it is absolutely potent. But another thing to consider with that, if you don't mind, I'm going to go on a little rant here for a second.
Go ahead.
Amos was an intelligence officer, if I remember correctly. He was specializing in.
He was a colonel.
Yep. Michael Collins was also an intelligence officer. And one thing that I have seen and noticed over and over and over again, and it's just a failure after failure. And I've attempted, if you're a one-man band, it's very difficult to pull a crowd. Let's say that, we'll put it that way. Intelligence drives the fight. I'll repeat that. Intelligence drives the fight.
It does.
In jiu-jitsu, there's a saying that position before submission. You have to be in the proper position before you can execute a submission. And it's the same thing in life as well. You can take that to business. You can take that throughout your life. Position before submission. And a lot of our guys, they act first without doing intelligence. Now, I can't say that for everybody, but I've seen a lot of failures where they don't do the intelligence gathering process first before they execute deeds of vigilance.
Yeah, they don't do their homework.
No.
They don't want to do their homework.
And that's very important. I mean, intelligence drives ops. It drives operations. You know, a mission is pretty simple. A mission is that there's a problem, and then you find the solution and bring that solution to fruition. That's your mission, you know. Now, I'm not advocating for doing anything illegal, of course. We're talking about theory here. You know? But,
That's true.
You know, it's interesting that these guys were intelligence officers or involved in intelligence or specialized in intelligence.
It is. It's really interesting. On a random side note, do you know much about Revelo P. Oliver? Do you know much about him?
Not much at all, no.
Well, he was at one time in the OSS during, I believe it was during World War II. You know, it became, I think, the CIA. When was the CIA founded? Wasn't it in 1947, I believe?
I knew the OSS was a precursor to the CIA. I didn't know what year it was founded exactly.
Yeah, I believe it was 1947. And Revelo P. Oliver, he was a part of that, you know. And but what he witnessed during World War II, I believe he was in Europe, stationed over there. But he learned the truth. He's a very interesting guy. I'd like to talk about him sometime in the future for sure. But you know that Colonel Amos. Let's see. I've got just a little bit of background information about him. This isn't any deep dive. This is just his Wikipedia page here. Ulias Amoss was born in 1895. He died in 1961. He was a U.S. intelligence officer who wrote the original essay on leaderless resistance in the 1950s after he retired and was upset with what he wrote was bad operational practices of the CIA. That's interesting right there. Amos operated a private intelligence organization called International Services of Information, which was ISI. I think it was mentioned in the essay. On October 30th, 1962, which that's interesting right there. It says here he died in 1961, which, I mean, this is Wikipedia. You know, this could be completely erroneous. Its official periodical Inform described ISI as a private nonprofit foundation that has been providing independent intelligence from other lands for over 16 years. Inform was edited by Ulias Amoss from its inception in 1955 to October 1961, whereupon his wife, Mary Veronica Amoss, stepped into the role the following month. According to Amos, resistance cells with members who made contact with U.S. intelligence agents or émigrés, ethnic anti-communist organizations, were being penetrated by Soviet and Soviet bloc intelligence agencies, broken up, the members tortured, and sometimes executed. Therefore, Amos urged U.S. intelligence policy be shifted from an old-fashioned hierarchical model, such as that used in World War II with resistance organizations, and refocused on encouraging leaderless resistance to destabilize and subvert Soviet occupation of Eastern European countries such as Poland. The example he cites in detail in his essay. Amos warned that traditional hierarchical underground cells organized by the CIA in Eastern Europe were being penetrated and liquidated by Soviet and Eastern Bloc counterintelligence operations. Amos is quoted as saying, "We do not need leaders, we need leading ideas. These ideas would produce leaders. The masses would produce them, and the ideas would be their inspiration. Therefore, we must create these ideas and convey them to the restless peoples concerned with them." In 1961, leaflets were airdropped over Cuba by anti-Castro Cuban exiles and their allies with close ties to the Central Intelligence Agency. The leaflets used the concept of leaderless resistance and called for the creation of phantom cells, or the title of this stream here, Celulas Fantasmas, which is Spanish for phantom cells. There was no apparent connection between Amos and the leaflets, according to Michael Paulding, who is writing a book on an early OSS figure and has studied Amos and his work. Amos died in November 1961, a few months after the failed CIA-orchestrated Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. Amos's leaderless resistance essay is republished posthumously in 1962 in the Inform newsletter, having been rewritten from the 1953 original by a freelancer. So yeah, that's just a little bit about the life of Amos. I'd like to know more. I'd like to know more about him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his written works have and his ideas have spread pretty far.
They have, it's pretty inspiring. And it's interesting how Lewis Beam decided to apply this to our current struggle. You could say he took something that an intelligence officer that was concerned with American intelligence cells there in Eastern Europe that were being, infiltrated and liquidated. And Beam applied this to our current situation, you could say.
Sure. I mean, cell structures isn't foreign really to this particular cause. To give an example, Harold Covington, his Northwest Quartet, he recommended something called a trouble trio. You ever heard of this?
No, I haven't. Let's hear it.
Okay. Well, the trouble trio is a 3-man cell. You have a company commander, and you've got an XO, and you got a quartermaster in there. And it never got more than 6 people, and when it got to 6 people, it broken off into another cell. But he writes about this. Of course, it's a fiction novel, kind of like lumber. You build your own house. And
yes.
He recommended, or in this, he talked about the trouble trio, and the holy grail of a trouble trio was operational readiness. Operational readiness is when you have all your ducks in a row. You've got your safe houses, you've got your cars, you've got your tools of the trade, we'll say. You've got all these things in order. And that was the holy grail, was operational readiness.
Okay.
But this wasn't a foreign concept with, the cell type structures.
Yeah. Is this from the Brigade?
That is from the Brigade, yep.
Yes. I've never read the Brigade. I'd like to here in the future. I've actually got a friend on Telegram that is, he had just finished recording an audiobook for it. So I'd like to listen to it here soon. What's that?
Is that Mr. Mustache Supremacist himself?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Yeah, he's a good man. I like him.
Yeah, I do too. He's a good fella. But anyways, I was about to say, we've got a few more minutes here. I think we've pretty well covered the topic of leaderless resistance. I was considering reading another essay by Lewis Beam called Understanding the Struggle, but I think I don't know if we'll have time to cover that tonight.
Sure. Unfortunately,
I've got to work in the morning. So we'll save that for a later date. But man, do you have any? What would you like to talk about now, Billy Bob?
Well, we kind of threw in caveats going through that essay there.
Oh yes.
I tried to add what I can, but this has been a pretty interesting conversation. I'm not used to this. I don't speak on streams or podcasts or anything like that. I'm more of a person-to-person type of guy.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting experience for sure.
Well, man, I'm glad you decided to come on. It's been an honor to have you. This is your first time, and I think it's been pretty good so far. We've been
invite, man, for sure.
We've been pretty ultra focused on the topic at hand. Let's see. I thought that going back to Lewis Beam, his work in Russia, I thought was pretty interesting, and his essay regarding his trip to Russia, I believe it was back in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything you took from that you thought was really interesting?
I like that he went there. That isn't the first time that he's talked about Russia.
Yes.
And it's not the first time that people in the cause, we'll call it, have spoken about Russia. Some people see Russia as an emerging ally. That's going to cause some controversy considering the past couple years and the amount of propaganda. I mean, I don't know if you've seen recently, my senator in the state of West Virginia and Brad Paisley, who's also from West Virginia, went over there.
The country music singer?
Yeah, he went over there and made a song with Zelensky.
Oh my God, are you
it's
serious?
it's
Son of a bitch.
yeah, it's cucked to the max. But
I did not see that yet, but yeah, I know Brad Paisley. I remember the only song I can think of right off the top of my head, he wrote that Whiskey Lullaby song and he sang it with Alison Krauss. But I mean, this has been like, shit, man. This is back when I was in high school. So that's like almost 20 years ago.
he had put out a song with LL Cool J called The Accidental Racist.
Oh shit, I actually seen that. My wife actually showed me that a couple of months ago, and I was like, man, Brad's really went fucking downhill, it appears.
Yeah, man, they're just puppets.
They are.
Basically puppets for shekels.
That's all it is. But what were you going to say? What was the senator's name? It wasn't. Is Joe Manchin the senator?
Yep, that's him.
That's who went. Shit.
Yep, Joe Manchin himself. Yep, absolutely. West Virginia is a weird place. Always
dude. It seems like it. It seems like it. Kentucky's another interesting place too. There's a lot of glowing sort of activities that have happened in Kentucky and West Virginia over the years.
Yeah, I don't know too much about Kentucky's glowing activities, but I can talk about West Virginia's glowing activities for certain.
Oh man,
a lot of DHS type training activity here and some black operations going on in West Virginia.
There was some things like that that were happening in Kentucky as well. I know here recently, I think I'd mentioned this book to you. It's called Bluegrass Conspiracy, and it talks about a guy named Andrew Carter Thornton III. And he was, oh my God, dude. Have you heard about the advertisements about the movie Cocaine Bear?
Yeah.
That came out recently? Well, that is based on a true story. The Cocaine Bear. Okay, Andrew Carter Thornton III. He was a member of the Lexington Police Department. See, there's a lot of corruption. Well, basically in any American city, but back in the 70s and 80s, there was a ton of corruption in Lexington, Kentucky, and Andrew Carter Thornton III was. He worked as a narcotics officer for several years, a detective. Dude, he was in the military for a period of time, and he was a drug trafficker.
Wow.
And he claimed to work for the CIA. Well, I don't want to delve too deeply into this because sometime in the future, me and a friend, we may try to do something with it. But long story short, on the morning of September the 11th, 1985, I forget the old man's name, but this was in Knoxville, Tennessee. He woke up early that morning to find a dead body in his driveway. Someone that had jumped out of an airplane. His parachute malfunctioned. And he had, I think, 70 pounds of cocaine strapped to him around his waist in duffel bags. And I don't know, there's a lot of mystery to it, but he set the plane to fly into the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. He set it on autopilot. It was going to crash in. It ended up crashing actually around Nantahala, North Carolina. But as he was dumping cocaine out of his plane, and over the Chattahoochee National Forest there in northeast Georgia, he dumped a couple of duffel bags of cocaine there. And he had people that were going to pick it up, after everything was done. It's claimed that he had some sort of air customs plane that had been tracking him, and that's what led to all of this. But what ends up happening is there was a black bear, a 250-pound black bear, that got into that bag of cocaine.
Yeah.
And man, it ended up dying, of course. But man, for 5 minutes, that bear could have probably tore up anything on this planet. It's pretty wild, man. But yeah,
Oh,
there's a lot of going back to my original point. That Carter and his associates, they ran a training place that was somewhere in Kentucky, on in central Kentucky, at a rural area where they would bring in fucking Middle Easterners. I believe they would bring in Afghanis and maybe Libyans and some other types, to train there
mhm.
in arms and stuff. It's there's a lot of strange shit that seems to happen in Kentucky and West Virginia.
Yeah, Appalachia is a very interesting place for sure. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day that Appalachia, traditionally, it's almost been like Chernobyl for outsiders. Transplants try to come here and they don't last very long. They can hang here for a little bit, but before then they get radiated with the hillbilly in them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
They can't handle. They can't swing it. But
yeah.
now, if you think about, I don't know if you're familiar with what goes on in Israel and Palestine there, but the way they confiscate land, have you ever looked into that?
No, I actually really haven't. I haven't paid a lot of attention to that.
Yeah, there's a pretty good it's leftist, whatever. I don't really ascribe to the left right paradigm at this point of the game. But
Yeah.
Telesur and Abby Martin does pretty good stuff about Israel. And what they do is that they'll move into a Palestinian community, and they'll set up the government will come in there. The Israeli government will come into a Palestinian community and set up a trailer on Palestinian property. Then they'll build a road leading to that trailer, and then they'll set up power there, and then they'll put armed guards and military units around there, and then eventually begin to drive out the entire community and then make that part of Israeli territory.
Yes.
How that correlates to Appalachia is that a lot of these people that are coming in here, what's happening now is that they're able to survive almost synthetically. They can
Yes.
they can survive remotely. They can get funding that way remotely through the internet. They can get entertained through the internet. They have all their gentrification tools, such as coffee shops and microbreweries and things of that nature. It's very
Oh
similar
yeah.
to what's going on in Palestine and the Israelis capturing territory there. You know,
Yes.
You're,
Damn, it is. It fucking really is.
it really is for sure. But the difference is that they're fighting with rocks and we're fighting with AKs. If you want to,
Yeah,
not to
man.
that, I'm just saying, as a metaphor.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Um, that's a very good analogy. That's a damn good analogy.
But really, the greatest, what we're talking about here is you're talking about leaderless resistance. And that's the key word in there, resist. You know,
Yes.
one of the scriptures in the Bible that's talked about quite often in these circles when you go into Christian identity and Christianity in general, resist the devil and he shall flee. The word no is a great tool for resistance. The word
Yes.
to refuse to submit, to say no, to refuse to obey is an act of defiance. I don't know if any of you have ever practiced this, but you just go to somebody that's a stranger that's trying to ask something to you and you just say no, anger almost overflows them instantly. People do not like to hear no because it is an act of resistance.
Yes.
You know, a lot of people say yes to a lot of things, and that's where we've got here now is because people have said yes or they've said nothing. I heard it said this way one time. The best thing you can do is the right thing. The second best thing you can do is the wrong thing. But the very worst thing you can do is nothing.
Oh, I love that. I love that little that adage right there. That's a good one.
You
I
know,
love that.
so say no more. Say no more.
Man, I like what you said though. That the the act of refusal. That's one of the greatest powers that we have. You know.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, compliance, submission really the key word there is obedience. If you
That
say
is.
no, no, in this day and age, no is an act of violence. In this day and age, no is an act of protest because everybody else is saying yes. And we're never going to get the path of the victim. Never. It
No.
doesn't matter what you do. Don't matter how bad you get beat, shot, tortured, ripped off, dishomed, whatever. It doesn't matter.
No. They don't
So
care.
resist.
Goddamn right. That's the best thing to do.
Yep.
I love it.
But I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been pretty fun.
Well,
Sorry, I
man.
was a little bit sketchy there for a minute, but I think we fell into our own there.
Oh yeah, we did. I've really enjoyed this. The chat has enjoyed it. I did see a guy earlier that said something. Basically, he's like, "Oh my God, we are fucked. I'm a long time lurker here, and we're all going to end up criminals just watching this." Nah, we're trying to teach you how to not end up hemmed up, basically. And no, we do not encourage any acts of violence or any of that typical disclaimer, anything like that. Especially nowadays. I mean, good Lord, look at what all's happening. People say the wrong thing online and they get a knock on the fucking door.
Absolutely.
Shit happens.
Yep.
You got to watch your mouth. Can't make actionable statements, anything like that.
Well, I mean, if intelligence is a crime, and to be honest with you, in a lot of the world, it seems like intelligence is a crime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's being intelligent and saying no is a damn act of resistance, and it almost damn near is a crime for sure.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
It is. But anyways, Billy Bob, is there any last words, any parting thoughts you would like to mention?
Man, I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate everybody here listening to me. Like I said, this is my first time speaking out. I've never been one to be a public figure or a public-facing figure in any way, shape, fashion, or form. I've more been a one-on-one person. But it's been interesting, and I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope people got something out of it, and I just really appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to us tonight.
Oh yeah, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day and your schedule this evening to come here and talk to me. And I also want to thank you too for all of the unique information that you've given me over time. And I'd like to say this: the door is always open. We'll have to do this again sometime in the future. We'll talk
Absolutely.
about some different things.
Yeah, I'd like that for sure, especially when we're talking about our homeland. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, I know here soon I'd like to do a front porch stream. Get some guys from Appalachia I know together and just shoot the shit. Just have a very chill kind of a shit posting stream. Have a few laughs. That's something I'd like to do in the future. But like I said, we could talk about any topic here in the future. I'd like to maybe talk about infinite and finite games, and
Sure.
hell, maybe we can get into talking about some German brokery or some Enochian magic or anything crazy like that. Some ancient Appalachian rituals. That's something I'm interested in.
Yeah, it'll get pretty wild, man. I'm sure we can come up with something fun there.
All right. Well, Billy Bob, I want to thank you again. And guys, I want to thank everybody that stopped by. I hope, like Billy Bob said, that you got that we were able to enlighten you a little bit. And it's like I said, research things for yourself. Look into some of these figures that were in the movement in the past, because we can learn a lot of things from these guys. What we are facing today, the only real difference is the advent of technology. It's more intrusive. It's more can be more subversive. But a lot of the things these guys went through in the past are still happening today. We can learn those lessons and apply them when the time is required. But anyways, guys, I want to thank y'all for stopping by. Hope y'all have a great night, great day, whichever part of the cycle it is in your part of the world. And I want to thank you again, Billy Bob, for coming on.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Thank you for coming on. And guys, I will Talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a great night. Thank y'all for watching. Bye-bye.